This is the Nobel Podcast, where we talk about how to optimize your technology, life, and mind. We're joined by special operations veterans, entrepreneurs, investors, and others who have overcome difficulty to make it to the top of their craft by staying in the fight.
Welcome to the Nobel Podcast. I'm Rob Huberty. We have Dustin Kisling, who grew up kind of as a cowboy in Wyoming, went to the Naval Academy, Navy SEAL, transitioned to corporate America, started your own business, started a Veterans Advocacy Group, all over the place.
Yeah, a little bit of everything.
Absolutely. So tell me, what was it like growing up?
Yeah, so I grew up small town, Wyoming. It's a town called Lander, Wyoming. Not a big population. I think the joke at one point was it was cows outnumbered people or something in the state. So super small town. It's an agricultural community, probably just a normal small town ranch kid. My high school years were spent working for the ranchers in the area.
If you were to put it on paper, what sounds like a Navy SEAL should be, I think growing up in the ranch seems incredible. Do you think that makes you tougher? What is that upbringing like that educates you, for the rest of your life?
Yeah, I think Wyoming's a unique place. You could tie the upbringing, the history, the culture, all that kind of into like what makes people like motivated to go do something like the SEALs. Wyoming's always been like an independent, fierce, rugged state. When you think about how people first arrived there over the Oregon Trail, like these were people seeking a better life who basically just cast everything away, put everything in a wagon and then headed west. So they were rugged, they were tough, they were independent. And I think when you look at how Wyoming, people go through the Oregon Trail, a place called South Pass City, I think that rugged independence and the survival and just that toughness has kind of stayed with the state a long time. So I think that kind of ties into agricultural upbringing as well. Like it's hard work. You're up early, you're up late, you're working. I mean, it's hard. I think someone else on another podcast, maybe it was Mike, mentioned like throwing hay bales.
That was Sam.
Yeah.
Sam shoveled shit.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. That's the exact attitude. Part of that kind of just builds this mindset of resiliency and purpose and strength that I think builds a strong foundation.
How did your family end up in Wyoming?
So I got some wild stories about my family out there. So in the 1800s, they settled in Lander Valley. So the ranch has been there. It's one of the ranches in Wyoming that's been in the same family for over 100 years.
So you're generational ranch.
Yeah, we're generational Wyoming. I think we did it at one point. I'm like 8th or 9th generation.
Wow.
So I mean, it goes deep for America. Maybe I might have exaggerated the 8th or 9th, but I mean, it runs deep by American standards, especially in the West when we didn't even get out there till mid 1800s. Yeah, so they settled a ranch out there, and then the family's still in the family. They've been working it ever since.
What was school like in kind of a little bit more rural area? What was that like? What sports did you get into?
Yeah, so I wrestled in high school, and then I would run cross country, I think in the spring, just to get in shape for wrestling.
Sounds miserable.
Yes. Funny story about running. It's once we got out of teams, I don't think I ran for 2 or 3 years. I hated it so much, I wouldn't run. I just was like, no, not going to do it. And it was later after that, I got back into it. But yeah, I'd run cross country in the spring. And I think that was more just getting in shape for wrestling season. And I wrestled. I won't claim to be an amazing wrestler by any means, but I think it builds a strong foundation. I mean, you look at like even the SEAL community and buds and a lot of the succeed there. I think wrestling builds a strength. It builds character. I mean, it's hard, it's grueling work. And I think, what I like about that is because growing up in a small town, I think you'll hear a similar story across a lot of small towns in America. Like, these independent, patriotic kids that want to go make a difference. And I think you'll see that. I think that just characterizes small town America to a certain degree. But then I always like the aspect of wrestling, because wrestling is a team-based individual sport, if that makes sense.
Absolutely.
Yeah, if there's a team structure to support you to get you to where you're going. Like behind the scenes, the quality of your training partners in practice, the quality of your coaches, the quality of the teamwork that goes, all of that is going to make you prepared for that moment when it's just you. And I think that's, not to go too deep on it, but I think that's a good example of life as a whole. Like we all have the support structure, and even the teams, you've got the platoon. But at the end of the day, like in the wrestling match, you're standing there in the lights. It's just you. They've helped to prepare you for the moment, but you have to perform. So even I think when you think about even like the SEAL community, you've got a team structure, you've got a team support, you're building, you're going through training to make everybody better. When it comes down to taking that shot, nobody else can take that shot for you. They've helped prepare you for it, but it's on you to not mess up.
I mean, there's a beauty and it feels, close to fighting. I guess, if you were to box, maybe that's harder, but wrestling feels pretty difficult for a sport. I learned a lot out of it and it helped shape me.
Yeah. I think it's character.
Yeah. Now, so you grew up, you ended up on the path to the Naval Academy, which is something that you have to plan for in high school. You have to apply. That's a really difficult process. When did you know you wanted to serve, and when did you know you wanted to go to the Naval Academy?
Yeah. So just super patriotic. One of my grandpas was in the Navy during World War II, just super patriotic community and environment. And I always knew I wanted to go do something bigger than myself. Early on, like when I was younger, I started looking at the Marines, and I think freshman year of high school or somewhere in high school, we started looking at the Marines. One of my best friends at the time, we looked at the space system where you could join the Marines with your buddy system. And I don't know all the details of it anymore. So we were going to sign up together, but then he ended up.
So is that enlisting that you're talking about? You're going to enlist first. Okay.
So I thought about enlisting in the Marines. They ended up with like echocarditis or something, it was fluid around his heart, and he was ineligible.
Okay.
Read this book called Rogue Warrior, probably shaped the path of a whole generation of young men that wanted to go do something bigger. And that's where, to me, I realized, what's the toughest job I could find in the military to challenge myself the most and go make the biggest impact? And then that's when I discovered the SEALs. And I think there was another movie like Tears of the Sun out or something. These are all, did you see that one?
I did. I don't remember what year that came out, but that one wasn't as influential. Sam really liked that one.
Yeah. That was the jumping point where I said, what's the toughest of the tough? And I said, SEALs. And then I started researching it. So I was like, I'm going to enlist in the SEALs and go do it right after high school, go join the SEALs, get into it immediately. But then I'm a very analytic brain for the most part. I don't always make decisions based on it, but I like to research and like get every detail. I just started researching the SEALs, and I saw this thing called the Naval Academy that had the highest success rate at BUD/S. And mentally, I said, if I'm going to go do something like this, why don't I take the path that sets me up for the greatest chance, greatest probability of succeeding? This place called the Naval Academy had a really high success rate at BUD/S. And so I said, why don't I go do that? Because then I'll be positioned.
Right.
I showed up on day one. I didn't know what an officer was. I didn't know what enlisted was. All these kids were like, oh, we went to summer seminar. Here's what to expect. And I was like, what? Like, what am I doing here? Because I had the end state in mind. Right. And it was just a step in the process to get there.
Were you a troublemaker at all? Did you fit in with that? Did it satisfy an itch that you had?
I did get put on restriction once. I think I probably would have got maxed out. There's this black N sweater, that everybody wears. It's like yellow with an N star or black N or something on it. I forget all the details, but it's when you get maxed out. Maxed out is max tours, max demerits, max restriction days. So
you get a piece of clothing for that?
Yeah, you do. And then I'm like, there's an event every year that I think it's Halloween when all the people who've got maxed out like wear their sweaters proudly through.
Oh my God.
The thing. So I did get in trouble once. Stood restriction. Got to pay my dues on all of that, it's unique, I think, to the military academy. So yeah, I hated it. Yeah, I struggled. I was a straight A student. I had 1B. It was in like French, but then I went to the Naval Academy and I was so over my head. I think it's like anything else. If you just put your head down, you can make it through. It's not fun. And there's a common saying about the Naval Academy. It's a good place to be from, but not a fun place to be, or something. Like, I might have messed up the paraphrase. I will say, despite all of that, the Naval Academy has been the best networking thing I've ever had in my life, more than the SEALs, surprisingly.
So you go through the academy and then you have to get selected SEALs. What was that like? How did you prepare for that?
Yeah, I think it kind of goes back to my first statement, was like, the academy has a high success rate at BUD/S, where they did traditionally. I haven't looked recently.
Yes, because it has not changed.
Because you're so prepared for it. And so academy, you do like a weekend screener, and then you do like interviews, and you do PSD. You do all of that continually. I didn't get it first round. The first round of selection, I think they had 24 spots, and I didn't get it. I got SWO, Surface Warfare Officer.
So you're going to be a SWO.
Yes, I got.
You had joined only to do this for higher success rates.
Yes.
Hip hip to the ship, baby.
I'd spent 6 years of my life investing to try to be a SEAL, and then I got SWO orders.
Okay.
I didn't take it very well. I think that was a good lesson in life for me. I took it very, very poorly. But I do remember in my interview telling him at one point when they're like, what if you don't get it? And I was like, I'll be back. You will see me again and again until I get a yes. And I was like, I will commit my entire existence as a SWO to coming back. And that's what I told the panel interview. And so, yeah, I didn't take it very well. Obviously, you invest 6 years of your life with this expectation and then it doesn't come to fruition. I mean, it's a mental struggle. There's no easy way to put that. But then there was like a late round selection. The academy got 2 more spots. We got 26 spots, I believe, that year. And I was one of those selected. I found out late. And so it was like awesome, finally. But I was like the second round draft pick for SEALs at the academy.
They call the person who graduates last in their class at medical school doctor.
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter.
You're good. But I mean, I think that's part of it too is, I think sometimes the academy gets a bad rap. They get a bad name. I will say there's a lot of people that are very by the book, every checkbox, everything. But I mean, being a little bit of a rebel, standing some restriction, getting in trouble. I didn't have the best grades.
I feel like that's a story for most everybody.
Yeah.
We talk about that a lot, about getting in trouble, particularly at the academy.
Yeah.
And for some reason, I think very successful people probably threaded that a lot.
I do. And I honestly think that makes good rounded officers. Because like, if you're, especially in the platoons, you've got like hard charging, aggressive people who are out there to make a difference in the world. And you're highly trained, you're highly prepared. And I think you have to have someone that like connects or empathizes with that to a certain point. So it's not just like, here's the line in the sand and we're just going to punish everything. Like you got to have someone that's been there a little bit so you can understand the mentality and the aspect. I think it's a lot about just like understanding people and what motivates people. And I mean, I would say that that's not a bad thing coming out with a little bit of academy background. There's probably a lot of officers or admirals or whatever might disagree with me. But I mean, I only did 6 years, so maybe they're still there, so maybe they'll have a different take.
Buds, did it live up to what you wanted? You were thinking about it for 6 years.
Buds sucks. There's no way around it. I don't think you can sugarcoat the fact that Buds.
It's pretty bad.
Yeah, there's nothing to say. Oh, Buds wasn't bad. But the academy also, I think, is a unique position. Is one of my buddies at the academy said, if an officer goes through academy and makes it and quits, like he's. I think the way he phrased it was like he's dead.
Right.
And when you look at it, because at the academy you have a screener, like I have buddies who went through a year ahead of me. Like I don't want to see you get it handed to you, but you get it handed to you a lot more information than like some of the guys who just go in without the background. You still have to succeed, but like you have a better understanding of expectations.
So I mentor the ROTC kids here. One of the kids that I did has made it through so far. Others haven't. It's really challenging. And I've got to see that from an outside perspective. And the academy preparation is better than the ROTC preparation. It's not close. I think all of the data supports that. And a lot of it is the expectation management of like, what the evolutions are, what to prepare for. How bad it really is.
Yeah.
Because I think that shock, it's no matter how we can shock you, there's no true prep for that. To have like actually specificity, I think really aids them, and then train for it for 4 years as opposed to perhaps you go to ROTC, only did it for 18 months, you're getting ready.
Yeah.
There's a distinct difference between performance, is my understanding.
And I think it's preparation and knowledge, because knowledge is power. Even then, like you can't prepare for the pain of week, but you also have a better expectation. I mean, my experience to look at that was I went all the way up until the Friday before Hell Week and I got rolled. I got a safety chit actually for running so slow on a run that I endangered the class. If I think what my chit reads, because I had like 3 stretch
before Hell Week, you said?
Yeah, the Friday before I got rolled in my first class.
What was going on?
Stress fracture. I had and it was funny because I went into the doctor and I remember going in and being like, this hurts here. I think it was 3 or 4 stress fractures. I mean, my legs were jacked up. And I remember the doc at one point was like, you're faking it. Get out of my office. Because I mean, like, yeah. And he's like,
they're not that great.
Yeah. And I was like, can I just get I forget what it's called. Like not an x-ray, but the next step for stress fracture.
Right.
No. And finally, I remember at one point threw the clipboard down. He said, fine, I'll give you one. And then when I got in, ended up, I had like legit stress fractures. But I got my only safety chit at Buds for running so slow that I endangered the class, which is hilarious. But then I got rolled on the Friday before Hell Week. So I'd already been through that first 3 weeks. So my next time through, and it's just knowledge is power, is when I went through the next time, I was able to game it a little better because I knew what to expect. And I would say the second time, pre-Hell Week, going through it a second time was a lot easier because I'd be like, okay, boats are going to get secured soon. Put out on this one or win this one or start winning. Like, not sandbagging the rest of it, but you just knew kind of there was an end to the misery and you kind of had expectations. So I would say the second time through the first 3 weeks was like a lot easier. Fast forward to once I did get healed up, and I talked to the same doc when I was healed up from the stress fractures, and he was looking at my chart and he's like, have I seen you before? I'm like, oh yeah, you saw me. He's
Well,
like,
I remember you.
yes. He's like, you must have broken leg. He's like, these were bad. And he's like, how long were you non-weight bearing? I was like, I wasn't. I didn't even get crutches. He's like, no, I wouldn't do that. It's like, yeah, I'm living proof. So I remember like getting into it with the doc about that, which is kind of funny.
I do think some of the mentality is that like you're in a very difficult training. Like, what do you think that we're going to do for you?
Yes.
And perhaps they see a lot of people who try to leverage them. I don't know.
And that's what comes down to like the difficulty of it. How do you filter out the folks who are there just trying to use a cop out versus the folks who are legitimate? I mean, it's a tough job. Like, how do you filter out all of that? Which is, Buds is a funny thing because did you ever run into Buds instructors in the teams after?
Oh yeah.
There was one there, and I won't say his name, but when you heard his name, it struck fear in everybody. I'm not exaggerating. I say it can make sitting in a chair painful somehow. Like, he was brutal, and he just, Hell Week, you'd hear his name and you'd hear his yelling, and you would just crush your soul. But made it at the end of Buds, and I was at SEAL Team 3 after that. And I remember, so in Buds, he'd always call me Mr. Kipling. Hey, Mr. Kipling, Mr. Kipling. My name's Kisling, but he'd always Mr. Kipling. I didn't see him for a good, I think it was year after Buds in the teams, walking down the hallway at Team 3, and he walks up to me and goes, Kisling, what's up, man? And I'm like, and then you notice this persona they're putting on, but it was just funny to me that like
they're playing a character.
Yes. And he was the scariest person I'd ever met. But in the teams, he was just knew my name. What's up, man? He was like, it was just funny seeing it come full.
I was in JTech school, and one of the instructors from second phase, who I was just, I think I understood most of the people who were playing that role.
Yeah.
I could understand that they were like laughing when they walked away and whatever the case may be. There was maybe 2 instructors that I don't necessarily know that of. And one of them I came face to face with, and I'm sitting in a classroom and I look across and I see him. I'm like, oh, that's it. We have to fight. That's going to be it. And I'm like, kind of getting, and he looks at me and he's just like, hey, Huberty. And I was like, and he put his hands out. He's just like, hey, man, you did a great job. I'm just saying. And we're like, yeah, let me buy you a beer tonight. And you're like, oh, you fooled me. You're like, man, I just like, I know I played a tough role. Yeah. I'm a bad guy.
Yeah.
And it surprised me. And then he was an awesome dude. And you're just like, you're pretty good at that job. It's like, yeah.
But it's a necessity. I think you have to have that barrier of Buds to be able to have that camaraderie on the back end too.
Yeah, I never did instructor duty. At the company, we have a couple people who have, and I think that's a very interesting thing.
Yeah.
And in hindsight, I probably wish that I would have done it. At the moment, you're like, I don't want to be a Buds instructor ever. Yeah. I just want to keep going to war. And there's something that you learn, I think, about when you do it.
Definitely is. But I think that also builds to the success of the team on the back end. Because that shared challenge and ability to overcome that. With a very high barrier to entry, you lose the ability of the team to be so trusting and cohesive.
Right.
I think a fact that a lot of people don't even know is like, once you get into the teams, you can still lose your bird. Like, you can lose your trident. We had guys do it on my first all the time. I've seen a couple tridents pulled over some dumb stuff. So like, you're always have a high level of expectation.
I mean, in the gym and in places it says earn your trident every day.
Yeah.
That's a pretty powerful thing.
Yeah.
So as you go through Buds, as you're going to platoons, what was that transition like? The new guy territory, being an officer, leading SEALs, what was that like?
Yeah, I think leadership's such a funny word because everybody says you're an EJO, you're an O1 or an O2. Now you're a leader in a platoon. And I think I think it's a funny word because you're building future leaders, but I think a big part of being a future leader is learning to be a follower and learning the nuances of what leadership actually is. And I think getting thrown into a platoon, at least my platoon was really good about it. There was a bunch of the Iraq war vets that were coming around, and they were really good. They were really good at teaching people and building them up and actually teaching you to be a good operator and a good leader and like positioning you to what it would take to be a leader in the platoon. I don't know if that happens all the time, but yeah, that's why I think leadership is such a weird word to me, is because you're taking these O1s and O2s, 22 years old, just being like, you're a leader in the SEAL teams. I don't think it works that way. I think you go through like junior officer training course, and I think you have leadership skills, but I think leadership's an evolving process. So like these kids who come in to be leaders in the platoon, yeah, you probably are a leader, but it's such an evolving process to say that you're like a SEAL leader right off the bat. I think you might do a little disservice to expectations for some of these kids, because you still have to learn. You got guys in the platoons who have done deployment after deployment after deployment. That knowledge base is something you will never have as an officer, because you've got a deployment limit. Like you're only going to be operational so long, where some of these guys could just deployment after deployment. So the transition for me wasn't bad. Like I had really good platoon, really good OIC, really focused on, the right things. Then I went to the Philippines for my first deployment. That was interesting. I mean, I'm glad I went there, but like, it's always a challenge. There's a war going on. You want to be in the war. That's why we.
So what was that? I never went, I was an East Coast guy, so I never did the Philippines. And, I hear stories from generationally of, West Coast team guys going there.
Yeah.
What was that experience like? What did you gain from that?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of lessons to be taken out of that. The challenge being like Iraq, it was the end of Iraq at the time. We had platoons over there. You're going and you're training a partner force. So you're not in the line. You're not in the battle. If you think about governance and access and all of the stuff that goes into sustaining a foreign country, it's a very big, heavy lift. We have, like, you look at the US government from the government side of the house, staff, you got embassies, you got a whole bunch of staff behind supporting our mission with a foreign country. We're a piece of that, but we're trained for war, not like teaching other people. And the SEALs, I know we had to get relevant. So we went and we were doing that mission set. So it was a learning curve. We lived on an island on a base with the Filipino Marines. And I will say that they are some of the hardest people I've ever met. I remember they went out for like a week or 2-week operation one time, and they had sardines and saltines. Okay, that's it. And you were like, how long are you guys out for? Like a week or two. And they came back like 20 pounds lighter. And we have MREs, we got supply drops, we've got like helicopters. They went out with sardines and saltines. So I gained a lot of respect for what a lot of the rest of the world goes through in that regard. Is like, they don't have the kit, they don't got the training, they don't got the funding, they don't got the backing we do, and they just make do. Like, they might not be the same by American standards in terms of supply and funding and all of the stuff that goes into making the military for the United States, but they just go get the job done with what they've got. And I gained a big respect for him out of that. I couldn't go live in the jungle for 2 weeks or something.
I did a J set to Colombia in the jungle, and it was, I had a similar kind of thing where there were capabilities that we certainly had that were, completely different and much higher. But the jungle is a scary place, and everything is trying to hurt you.
Yeah, my first month in country, I slept with my light on, because the first night laying we built these wooden structures on the bases in the jungle. So, I mean, it's still a base. And I remember just laying in my bed, and I look up and there's a spider this big right above my head when I turned the light on in the morning. And I don't think I slept for a month, but I slept with the light on for like the first month, because like these house spiders are massive, and I don't like spiders.
I get it.
So
I get it.
Yeah, that was my first morning in country. It was terrifying.
So any kind of real takeaways from that training different forces, seeing the discrepancies?
I think it was just understanding the challenges of like that home country. And that was really my first exposure to the problem and the situation, I guess, the situation that a lot of these foreign countries we work with, they were there. I mean, that was their deployment for years. I was there for 6-7 months, and they're used to that. So we'd rotate in, do our piece for 6-7 months, and then they could talk through the personalities of previous commanders of those outposts. And so, like, for us, it's a snapshot of our life. I fly in from the United States. I spend 6-7 months with them, training them, helping them. For them, that's their life. Like they're there for a couple year deployment. Like they're in that country. So what I also like bizarre to us in the US, because I think we're super, super fortunate to live in a country where we don't have to deploy our military forces to simply protect us against terrorists, which I think it's not the case over there.
Right.
So I think taking away the perspective of the life we have here under the Western standards is pretty dang good. Like we don't have to deploy a whole battalion of Marines to fight terrorists on US soil.
Deploying to different parts of the world makes you appreciate the things that we have for sure.
Yes.
I know that, going to Iraq, Afghanistan, JSETs, whatever the case may be, going to Colombia and seeing the good things that we have that perhaps we take for granted.
Yeah.
It's a lot easier to go through life and not take what we have for granted.
Yeah. Just perspective. Afghanistan too. Going over there. So the first time I was an augment to another unit. You said something earlier that I would like to come back to is like expectation management. And there's a very, very smart officer that we were working with. And that was his thing. He just sat us down and he goes, hey, you guys are JOs. This is your role. He's like, expectation management. If you set your expectations properly, then you won't be disappointed. You won't be frustrated. You'll have the right outcome of the situation you're in. So that was probably the biggest lesson I ever took from the teams in terms of just like conduct and it's came over into life too, is expectation management. If you set your expectations appropriately and you can manage those appropriately to the situation, you're able to deal with any situation in life. It's just what your expectations are. That's one that you said earlier. And I that's one of my biggest takeaways from that officer was like expectation management. I only worked with him for like short 2-3 months. But he was one of the officers that just that short time period, like I looked up to him a lot.
They left something.
He probably doesn't even know my name. He probably would see me and be like, I don't know who you are.
Guy,
me,
see you.
Yeah, it'd be awkward. I'd be like, hey. But just the way he approached stuff left a lasting impact on me that I think was pretty critical to my development in the teams and even beyond, just life lessons. The other one, so my last deployment to Afghanistan, we were doing the VSO mission set. I think someone talked about it in a previous podcast. I mean, that one was a little wild. I think at one point we were one of the only units in our AO area of operation that didn't take a green on blue casualty.
A green on blue
meaning partner force killing US forces.
Right. So somebody that you're training just shoots you in the back one day.
Yeah. We were one of the only units in our AO that did take one of those. And there's reasons behind that. And I mean, we were very cognizant of it. And that's a horrible situation. Yeah, we got put in some weird scenarios and stuff out of that. Yeah, we won't go too far down that road. But
I think, did some of that, you're talking about more kinetic, more war, Afghanistan. Did some of that live up to the expectations? Talking about that, when you joined the SEAL teams, the thing that you wanted to do, did you get to do at least some of it? Did it look the way that you thought it would look?
I think there are certain aspects that, like a gunfight's a gunfight.
Right.
Like, not every gunfight's the same, but I think at the end of the day, like if you're in a gunfight, you're in a gunfight.
Right.
Like there's no way around that. I don't know how else to
You'll know when you're in one.
You will know when you're in a gunfight. And so, yeah, in terms of that lives up to the expectations. I think I had during that deployment, there was one situation where I was like, it's never going to get better than this. We had like a automatic fire coming our way. Our snipers were shooting at somebody. We had 2 helicopters providing air support. It's like the brass was landing in our and I'm like, and you're just like, I've seen this in movies.
Yeah, that's cool.
And then we went on another op with the Marines that was, I would say it's as close to what you see in a movie as possible. At one point, they were shooting HIMARS, dropping GBUs. I saw a tank get blown up.
So HIMARS are the missiles that you see in the news, and then GBUs are guided bombs.
Yeah, big bombs. I watched a tank get blown up.
That's pretty cool.
It's wild. I watched a medevac helicopter get shot off approach.
I am very inspired by anybody who had what were the call signs? Pedro and Dustoff.
Yeah.
Both of those, the medevac helicopters, those guys are very brave.
Yeah.
They come no matter what. They fly when no one else flies.
Yeah.
They don't have any guns. They have basically they have maybe one guy has an AR or something like that, and they'll land. They don't get shot off very much. They will land and take the fire.
Yeah.
So to get shot off for them is pretty extreme.
Yeah, it was wild because I won't say we were supporting. There was a bunch of stuff going on at the time. We were in a Marine AO. I love those guys though, by the way. Like you're getting on this bird and we're going to do this like week-long clearing op. And we're in these Gucci kit. Like, I mean, we had a lot of resources.
We had a pretty good.
And this Marine sitting there, he's like, I think this is from Vietnam. And but it was like a badge of honor for them to have this old like kit that was like old. And yeah, they were proud of it. I mean, I loved working with the Marines. Those guys they get after it. They're awesome. Yeah, the bird didn't even make land. Like they had a casualty in a building and he tried to come into the building. They were just taking so many rounds. And I remember he came around and he circled and they just were like, hey, can you just clear that tree line before we come back in? So they had to bail on the casualty back. Then
I think they just have balls. It almost like makes me want to tear up when you're talking about like, yeah, man, it's American. I'm coming. You're like,
yeah, they're there for you, which is, I mean, I want to segue this into a little bit of the nonprofit group, the work I did. One more thing I will say on Afghanistan is my biggest takeaway from that. I remember there was one point where our guard called me out. And he's like, hey, can someone come help me? And there's this kid throwing rocks at him. And he was like, what do I do? I'm like, let me go get the interpreter. And so I went to get the interpreter and I came back and the kid was gone. And there's this local kid there smiling. I'm like, what happened? And he's like, I got rid of him. He won't bother you again. He didn't get rid of him. He's like, he won't bother you again. I took care of it. I'm like, I don't even want to know what that means. But awesome. Thank you. And he goes, I knew you were here to help brothers. And he said, brothers. And so we were talking a little bit through the turf and he's like, brothers. And I was like, yeah, it's pretty profound. He's like, he's from the desert. He doesn't know that you guys are doing good for us here. So I told him, go back to the desert. And he's like, brothers. And he said that. And so I remember we'd go out during the daytime because VSO, it's not all like nighttime raids and ops. You're like doing a bunch of presence stuff and trying to help the local populace so that they could be sustained after we left.
Leader engagement at KFBs.
Yes. And so I went out after that and he would see me and he'd come running up and be like, brother. And so it was super cool. And I always remembered that despite being our mission set to go like kill bad guys, what we were doing was trying to make a lasting impact on the lives of these kids. So I was only there for 9 months, I think. That kid is going to live the rest of his life in that environment. So I always like to think that, unfortunately, events last year kind of changed what I was always hoping would happen. But I always hoped that in the long run, even if I could change one life out of our conduct, not taking a life, creating a life that someone has a better opinion of the world, better opinion of America, that would grow up with a different viewpoint, would have been worth all of that.
Right.
I always until last year, liked to think that like that kid out there somewhere I will never know, but I tried to make a positive impact in his life to some degree. That's the humanitarian side of it. I'm like a softie at heart. And then we kill bad guys when we could.
Right.
Yeah. So that was always something I like to think that was like we were leaving a lasting piece there.
You get out of the SEAL team, stayed in for 6 years. Where did you go next? Let's go into Vogue. Let's talk about that first.
Yeah. So to answer that question real quick, I got out with no plan. I'm like the exact case study of what not to do when you leave the military.
Perfect.
I had no plan, no job, nothing lined up. Moved back to Wyoming and was like, I got nothing in the books.
Typically unusual for officers.
Yeah.
More common for enlisted guys to do that.
Yeah. So I'm like the case study on what not to do. But also I would say it worked because I'm here.
Right.
And working with you guys and getting able to do like solid work in the world now and like have a purpose and a mission. But like my path has been kind of weird. So I got out, went work GE, worked for a midstream company, oil and gas midstream that got acquired by Williams. Then I worked for GE. So I worked for these big Fortune 500 companies for a while. It's painful. They have their purpose and they have their processes for a reason. You got to manage that many employees with some sort of process, but it's a challenge. Kind of did a couple things. I quit GE at one point and just went travel the world. I biked across the world for 4 months, climbing mountains, just living off a bike trailer for 4 months with a buddy of mine.
When you say bike, what does that mean?
So we had like road bikes, and like the first event we did, we biked from Normandy to Chamonix, France, all human powered, took all our gear, climbed Mount Blanc, and then biked back to the ocean. So we did like all of that with all human powered, no Nazi. Yeah. And then we did that in another country. We biked. Yeah. So like it was like a 7-day bike ride in and then like a 5-day bike ride out. It was grueling. It was brutal. Like you're doing like 100-mile days with a 60-pound pack or 60 pounds in a bike trailer. So it was a good experience. So got into the outdoor space that way, kind of just lived that nomad lifestyle for 4 months around the world. I left the US, came back 4 months later, and it's kind of like deployment. I was like, I could live out of a bike trailer. So shortly after I got back, I was in Colorado, got invited to an event. I met this guy named Josh Jesperson, which I think you knew him in the team.
Was the buds with him? I was in platoon, Josh.
Yeah. And so I met him in the Colorado SEAL network. And then one day, so we did a bunch of stuff with him in the outdoors. And then one day Josh calls me. He's like, hey, do you want to make a difference? I don't know what yes, of course I want to make a difference. He's like, listen, there's this bill stalled in Congress that I think will help address some of the aspects of veteran suicides. He's like, it hasn't seen any moment, stalled out. Do you want to help get it passed? I'm like, yes, sign me up. He's like, let's start a nonprofit. Cool. What do we call it? Veterans Outdoor Advocacy Group. Perfect. How do we get a logo? I don't know. So Josh was like, you can't look back 20 years from today thinking that you didn't do everything possible in your power to help at least one person prevent veteran suicides, like at least impact one person. So it's kind of like the mentality. I think it's probably similar to when you guys started Zero Eyes.
Yeah.
Like, I was like, what does this take? He's like, I don't know. I know a lawyer that could do the articles. Cool, let's get him. And then we just I think we were on a meeting one time. We're just sitting at each other like, what now? I was like, should we start making phone calls? Sure.
Follow them up.
How do we get this bill pushed forward? I don't know. And so we just literally picked up the phone. I remember one point I was hanging flyers at like a coffee shop in a small town, Colorado, like, call your rep about this. And then, I mean, it just built momentum, and we went from having no idea what we were doing to help get this bill pushed through. And now Vogue sat on the task force to study like the access to outdoors for veterans. It went through the political process, so it kind of got changed a little bit as it goes through. But ultimately, our end goal was to allow outdoor therapy to be used as an adjunct therapy to the VA. So you think about the vets that get out and you don't want to go take the drugs that the VA prescribes, and you don't want to go sit and talk to a therapist that you don't even know. There's a place for those. So I'm not saying don't do those. I'm saying take every resource possible to get help and to get better mentally. But not everybody responds to those as well. So we used outdoor therapy as an adjunct to that, as an add-on, essentially, to get the vets another setting and another type of therapy to help them recover. So we did trips out of that. We worked on the policy out of that. It was just kind of cool getting a call one day.
I think it's pretty cool, particularly the outdoor stuff for me. I think there's some people who are really energized by that and find healing in it. I don't think it's everybody, but I think that the people who do find healing from that are also typically the people who would volunteer for special operations, the people who would want to go be an infantry soldier as opposed to a support soldier, who would want to be a Marine on the front line, are probably also more energized by the outdoors than perhaps, the people who aren't, that, this methodology might work better than this one, the outdoors, I think. Yeah, particularly for the people who pursue that and, unfortunately experience a lot of tragedy. Sometimes they find healing outside. They feel closer to God, not necessarily around, a lot of other people, but, with a few people doing something difficult outside.
Yeah. You hit it very well right there, actually. Like, not a lot of people, a small group of people doing something outside. So I think it goes even deeper into like the concept of purpose and the concept of community. And so when you talked about like the dust off crews, like, you knew they were coming. You always, when you're in the service, someone is there with your back all the time. Like, whether it's your platoon, whether you're a Marine, whatever it is, that there's a sense of community, camaraderie, and a sense of purpose, and a sense of like someone would have your back if you're a casualty. So then you get out in the regular world, and a lot of these folks get out and they don't have that backstop. So the sense of community goes away. Some of them lose their sense of purpose. I think what we've seen a lot is folks who joined up, they weren't in the fight. So we've had on outdoor trips tell us like, well, I was in the military, but I just worked this job, and I was never in a gunfight. So I don't really feel like I did my job. And we always have to say, wait, take a step back. You're part of the bigger picture. You are just as important as every other piece of that puzzle. And we were all in it together. Just because you didn't get to put lead down range and kill bad guys doesn't mean that your job was less important. So trying to reframe that mentality from, well, it didn't matter what I did, to be like, it's just as important.
it's weird to see the imposter syndrome that it shows up in every single person and everything they do in their life, where what I did wasn't enough. Oh, I don't know what I'm doing. And I think at the very highest level, you're just like, how am I here? I don't belong here. I'm not good enough to be here. We have this negative self-talk all the time. I think that there's a, in the military, I think that we view ourselves and how others see us more than, if you think that the other person is thinking about what you lack, they're probably too busy about thinking what they lack.
Yeah.
I guess is kind of an answer where we think that other people have these negative ideas of us when they are too busy with their negative ideas from themselves to judge you.
Yeah.
And no one says that aloud, and it's difficult.
Yeah. And I don't think human is a solitary. I don't think we're designed to be solitary. Like,
I don't think so either.
I was going to say animals, but essentially solitary beings.
Yeah. So I need a community or a tribe. That's the word that gets thrown out.
Which is actually one of my 2 favorite books I've ever read by Sebastian Younger. Yeah. They get pulled out of their tribe and then they've got nowhere. So they try to be an individual. And something we found was a lot of success for us. And what I like to say a lot is, if I can say the life of one veteran, that is worth everything. That is worth years of my work to say the life of one veteran, because that's one person that's around for the future. So what we've found is a sense of purpose. And Josh invented this whole thing and he goes through it. And something we do is it's like a flag ceremony, but it's not your normal flag ceremony. So like Gannett Peak's tallest peak in Wyoming, it's 26 miles back into the base of the mountain. No motorized, wilderness area. We got our buddies an outfitter, and it's called Cowboy Camp. Well, you stop over and then you go to the base the night before. And once you get there, it's you and like 5 or 6 other guys. And we take the flag out and we say, so think of one of your buddies. Like, we usually do it in remembrance. Like, I put Tyler Woodall's name on there, Chuck Keating's name on there, which 2 buddies of mine in the teams. And then you put the name on it. And it's like, whoever writes it, you tell their story and you tell like what you know about them and their story. You go through it. And then when you're done, like, it's like, hoo-yah, Chuck Keating. And then the rest of the group screams, hoo-yah, Chuck Keating, at the top of their lungs. And you're in this big valley by the tallest peak in Wyoming, and it just echoes. And you hear their names just reverberate through the wilderness. And so what we think about is, like, when you were in the military, you were living with a sense of purpose. Like, let's bring that purpose back. Like, live for that. And it's been pretty profound. We see a lot of folks be like, I'm going to live for him because I just wrote his name in ink. Then we just screamed it. You see guys get fired up and they tear up, you cry, and you're in the middle of nowhere. It gets a little emotional, but I think it's a healthy emotion. So that goes a long way. Some of these guys are
absolutely,
they're struggling in silence. You got to get them back into a sense of community, and then they know that there's people there with them.
I did a climb recently in Alaska for St. It was a Gold Star thing.
Yeah.
And we definitely did some hoo-yahs.
Yeah.
And there was an old Vietnam guy who was there, a SEAL, who's awesome, completely awesome.
Yeah.
And he did the hike at 76 years old, and it was honestly like almost jogging up the thing because he does it every day of his life.
Yeah.
But we ended up calling out a teammate that he hadn't honored before, and we got to participate in that, and that was pretty cool. So it's a similar thing. It's different, but it was also
right.
The outdoors to me is energizing, and to do that, and to yell somebody's name and to echo in eternity.
Yeah, it's pretty powerful. Yeah.
The reverberations come back and it's not forgotten. You say their name.
Yeah. It's like, it's pretty cool. We found that guys or gals even say, it's guys and gals struggle equally with some of this stuff, that it gives them a sense of purpose. Cause like, we're here for you. Like, now you have a community that you might have not recognized before. And you're also recognizing, the folks that aren't here with us anymore. And it's just, it's another mentality shift, I think. Cause people get out, and like, there's a ton of reasons why there's mental health issues after the fact. It's not always combat. Like,
I think when you face stuff, I think even the people who have a lot of issues with combat, the people who are that stuff the most, that are the most depressed by that, that are affected by that, still the solution to it, their path forward, has less to do with that moment and to do with the other aspects of their life, what I've seen. And I think it's an interest that they have to come to terms with, like, how they grew up or these other things growing up, as well as that moment, that one bad day.
Yeah.
It's because life is more than that one bad day.
Yeah. But once you're in that one bad day, how do you pull someone out of it?
Right.
And then I think part of it's an identity. It's a
It
big
is.
change. Like going from the structure and the purpose of the military, and you get out and you're just like, what now?
You're immediately replaced, and it's by design.
Yeah.
Because, you may be the greatest operator ever, the hero of everybody, King
Yeah.
Leonidas, whatever you may have been, the leader, the one, whatever it is, the one that takes everyone home. You
Right.
may be that warrior. But as soon as you retire, you were replaced immediately, because if you were killed in combat, they'd have to replace you anyway.
Yeah.
The whole US military teaches you how to get replaced.
Yeah.
And it's pretty depressing when you're totally replaced. And, perhaps your name is remembered by your friends, but a couple years later, I'm now 10 years out of the military, and a lot of my friends are retiring at this point. I don't know really what the community is anymore. Like, not really.
Yeah.
And
You
it's
lose
totally almost as if I was never there.
Right.
And that's okay. Like, I'm doing other things now.
Yeah, you've got another sense of purpose,
Right.
another, like, your impact on the world is now something different. I mean, it's a snapshot in time of your life, but like the show has to go on.
Yeah.
Just because you're not there anymore doesn't mean they're going to be like, oh my God, Dustin is no longer
we gotta
still
stop
right. We
everything.
can't do an
Stop
operation.
everything.
No, they're like, okay, good luck on your next
Right.
journey. We're going to continue the mission. We're going to continue to fight,
Right.
which is, I think, a hard concept for people.
So, as you have transitioned, and as you found a new purpose, and you've had other jobs, what were some of the issues? You said you worked at GE. So GE is known as this leadership development thing.
Yeah.
And you said that you struggled with that. What have you learned about transitioning? What have you learned about finding new purpose?
Yeah, I think there's a couple lessons I've learned along the way. Like, GE was a good experience. Don't get me wrong. Like, hey, I learned a lot working for a big machine like that, but there are frustrations along with it. The one that goes back to that lesson we talked about earlier, expectation management. You're not going to get out of the military and be like, you're going to solve all this company's problems. And like, you're going to reinvent the leadership wheel. GE had a long history leadership program.
They had one of the most renowned, respected.
Yes.
Jack Welch said, this is what the American leader is supposed to look like. GE was the forefront of that. And, you could say what the effect was, but I think certainly in the 90s and 2000s, maybe it was forging the best leaders in America. GE was thought to be that.
Yeah, it's like the peak of corporate leadership expectations.
Right.
Yes.
And you were in the tail end of that, and they're still around, but they're not what they used to be.
Right.
So you were probably in the middle of some of that, right?
Yeah, on the back end.
On the back end,
when they were trying to go through the back end of that. So I mean, it's also like just the same way the military will replace you, so will corporate. You're going to go on a spreadsheet.
Right.
Like, let's be real. At the end of the day, it's about profit.
Right.
It's about margins. It's about the business use case. So they want you to be successful as your job, but at the end of the day, you have to understand that you're a piece of a big moving machine, and your impact might be like so incremental you don't see it. I mean, maybe on that one project or whatever. So that was a good lesson. It is what it is. I mean, I don't know how else to describe it. Like, it was a good lesson. I actually, some really good people were there. The best person, I think, there was some of the best corporate leaders I've met were actually there. I actually respected them a lot. There's a gal named, I don't even know if I've ever told her name was like Janet Cooley. She was one of the project manager leaders or whatever it was. Like, she's like one of the first people in the corporate world that I really saw, like, her approach to like managing the team and managing stuff. And I have a ton of respect for her. And she's probably one of the earliest people in the corporate world. I was like, that is someone that I admire how they conduct themselves. And so like, you'll find those people everywhere. And I think it goes into a little bit about what is leadership. Like, there's core tenets of leadership that I think you could translate across the board. But I think if you took a deep, hard look at it, and there's so many case studies and this and that, can you take the same exact leadership approach to different things? I think with nuances and ability to adapt, but I think leadership is also an evolving thing. Like, if you took like a Steve Jobs or like Elon Musk, or you took like a Petraeus, or all these big recognized leaders, do they all have the same leadership style?
I don't think so at all.
I would argue no.
I would argue what I saw in the military applies very little to what I've done the rest of my life. I'm still learning, so I don't know, but I feel like a lot of the lessons I learned in the military was what not to do, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Rather than what to do. It was led by, this is a flawed system.
part of it is because at some given point, they may tell you that you kind of have to die. Keep charging. We expect 50% casualty rate. And you have to have an organization at its core that makes you do that, right?
Yeah.
The SEAL teams don't ever have missions that are that way.
Right.
But it has to exist that we have to make you give the ultimate sacrifice, and we kind of have to trade your life for it. And we are making that decision, and you don't get to make it.
Yeah.
Right. And so there's a lot of reason for, good order and discipline as it is seen at a very large scale. But I think that the ability to come down to an individual level and actually treat everybody fairly but differently is absolutely critical. There is no such thing as treating everybody equally.
Right.
And I don't think that you should, and I don't think that should be the goal. It's fairly. And that's something that's different, and I don't know, in my opinion.
Right.
And you give people what they need, and sometimes people need other things more than others. It's tough, and I'm still learning what that is and how that applies. I don't know.
My biggest challenge going into the civilian space was coming out of the military, where everybody was motivated by a common purpose, common team. Like you had this, I mean, because you go through a very long training vetting process to ensure that everybody has the same concepts. So in the civilian space, the biggest lesson I had to learn was like, some people are not motivated by mission. Some people are motivated by money.
No.
And then some people are motivated by the mission. Like, those are two different problem sets as a leader to deal with. Someone who's after the money and someone who's after the mission. And I'm not saying everybody is, but I did run into a previous jobs of mine, and I won't say which company. There's some people that are just there for the money.
Right.
And that's a whole different approach than someone who's motivated by the mission.
So, I worked at a warehouse, and in that warehouse, there's a lot of different people who had different answers why they wanted to be there. And, it wasn't necessarily for high pay, but they need a job. I'm doing this for college money. I'm doing it for X, Y, and Z. And one person came up to me one time and he was like, "Why are you here? Like, sometimes you're really good and sometimes you're not. What's going on?" And he's just like, "Oh, I'm here to meet girls." And that was an answer that I never saw coming. And a lot of people are for money. And they're like, "Oh, that department is $1 more an hour. Don't care anything in the world. I want that $1 extra an hour." And okay, that's how you're motivated.
Yeah. I think, man, it's such a complex issue. You got to look at, like, some people are just struggling to pay rent too. So that $1 can mean the difference between groceries or not groceries. So
I have always been highly respectful for the single moms and all of those, because they're on a no-fail mission. They do everything they want. The only thing, don't mess with my schedule. I need to pick my kids up at this time, and I need this to work. And they were always the best employees to me.
The human psyche of what it takes to, like, succeed, like, it's almost like no fail. I mean, I think some people misunderstand the fact that, like, a business unit has to succeed, right? You have to have performance to be able to succeed. But there are some people in organizations that they're on a no fail as well.
Yep.
Like, they got to put food on the table. They got to pay that rent. Like, I mean, that's a whole, like, aspect. I think sometimes you think, like, just the mission, pick up the weight. And you're like, there's a human component in the civilian space that I think people don't understand sometimes. Transitioning out of the military specifically.
So we'll start wrapping up here. A couple things. What is the thing that you have learned that you would tell somebody else who is transitioning? So somebody who's getting out of the military, you've gone a path that, it's many years removed.
Yeah.
You've gone down corporate America. You started nonprofits. You've been an entrepreneur before. We didn't really get into that much, but you've gone down all of these paths. What would you tell somebody who's on that path right now?
So I would go back to when I got out without a plan. And there's some lessons I learned that when you go to the transition programs, and I'm a little unconventional in some of the stuff I'm going to say. So
that's okay. There's more than one way to go about it.
I always like to say, take the pieces of advice that apply to you and apply them. And there's ones that don't apply to you and just don't do it. So mine, I would say, take a job. Like, your first job out of the military is not going to be your long-term job. Like, statistically, it shows that veterans quit their first job within 2 years.
So I went and got an MBA, and it's the same story. So you get 2 years of an MBA and you get your first job. This is the best job I'll ever had. 2 years, you're done.
Right.
On average.
And
I did too. I left in 2 years.
And not dissuading companies from hiring vets, but I think part of that is you're not going to come out of the military without experience. So when I say take a job, get experience. Like, you're not going to come out and you're not going to change a corporate structure that's just unrealistic. Companies have succeeded for a long time with rules set in place that are successful for that company or not successful. But you're not going to change that overnight. You're not going to be like, oh, you came out, oh, we got an 03 from the SEAL teams. Oh, come on and fix our company. It's like, no, you're like a GE of the world. Like you're still going to be plugged into your role and your place. So I would say don't have these really high expectations of changing the world right off the bat. Get out and get experience. If you've got a family, you got to pay your bills, you got to take care of your kids, you got to take care of your wife, you got to take care of your family. So even if it's not the perfect fit, take the job. Like it's not like the military where you are stuck in a role until the military allows you to leave. Get out, get a job. And saying take that job doesn't mean like half-ass it, like crush. Like when you take that job, give it your all. Do everything you can to make an impact. Do everything you can to succeed. Do everything you can to make the business unit better. Take the job that you might be like, there's no harm in taking it, but everything you do with 110%. Like, so crush that role and it will set you up for long-term success. You don't have to have it all figured out right off the bat. Like you're just going to have a lot of unknowns. It's going to be scary and painful. And then the next thing is network. Dig into your network. I think it goes into like sales and business development. A lot of that's networking too, especially early stage startup. And you're just like, you're trying to figure out like, how do we build a business cycle here? So I would say utilize your network. Don't make an ask in every first meeting. Get to know somebody before like, hey, can you help me with the job? Like do the coffee, stay in contact, but just network. Every job I've had post-military has been network.
So I would say one thing about the network to add from my perspective is networking isn't just meeting one person one time, it's building a relationship. Mm-hmm. And I think that people get confused at that of you don't need 1,000 people on LinkedIn because they're not going to really answer that email or they're going to do that. You have to find the ones that will do warm intros, kind of build relationships. Yeah. The network is like real relationships that like if someone called you, would you answer every phone call?
Yeah.
And the answer is at some given point, you have to say no to that.
Yeah.
But what are the phone calls that you're going to answer? And then you need to meet people like-minded.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a good point. Like, it's not just like a numbers game. It's like a quality game.
It's a quality game. Absolutely.
100%.
So on that note, kind of anything else about the transition?
No, I mean, just be fluid. Like expectation management. It goes
That's
back to that. Like
expectation management.
Just know what you're getting into and be prepared for it. Network, make an impact, do your best still. I mean.
So we'll ask a couple silly questions to end it. All right. So let's talk about a handful of books that have influenced you or kind of changed your life. Maybe 3 books or so.
Yeah. So I think, a lot of the answers are these business books and like they focus on like human thought stuff. I'm a history nerd because a lot of my thinking goes into like what makes the world what it is and what have been massive influences in the world. So I went down this road. So I would say Tribe by Sebastian Junger is probably, it's one of the top 3 because I think that really dives into like the human psychology and need and community and support, which I think wraps into all the stuff we talked about from the veteran space to the belonging. The other one, and you got to buckle up if you're not a history nerd, is called Jerusalem, the Biography. 700 pages in the nitty gritty details of the history of Jerusalem. Like I'm talking like this ruler's family's brother's sister did this, which influenced this. And goes into the nitty gritty details over 700 plus pages. But I think if you want to understand the context of the current world we live in, you have to go back and dig into what creates the environment we have right now. So that one is probably my favorite book I've ever read. But if you don't like history, don't read it because you are going to
say it's a dry read.
It's not dry, it's exciting, but you have to really be like, I'm in it to win it. I would say that one is, especially just given the current events of the world,
right? Everything
going on. Man's Search for Meaning, I think, is a good one.
Okay.
I think that one's, if you're looking for purpose, I think that one's a good one. There's like, I think those are 3 good ones. But I will say, instead of a 3rd book, I would say another medium is Dan Carlin's Hardcore History, King of Kings podcast. I would say if you really want to understand a lot about the world, that's a really good one. And it arrived me to the thought of thinking that I think when we look at the context where we are in the progression of mankind, we're probably at the most peaceful time in the history of the world right now.
It's crazy. We've been a warring people the entire time.
So like
fighting for resources.
Yeah. Power and money and resources. And like, so I think that's a really good one to like, where do we fit in the big picture of mankind? I think that would probably be what I would replace the 3rd book, TV or movie with.
And then I guess, what are life hacks? What are things that you do in your life that make your life a little bit better? Are there routines that you do? Is there any kind of practice that you recommend other people do because it's good for you?
Yeah, I'm not the most productive in terms of like having life hacks. I think for me, it's just organizing the chaos of my mind. My mind never shuts off. So like for me, it's just getting it organized. I'm a checklist. So if I can build a checklist for the days ahead, and then I can map out what needs to be done, then I can knock that checklist out. That's probably the biggest one. I'm a big advocate, especially just looking in the veteran space, the outdoors, like getting outside. So like, even if you just go for a walk in nature. Yeah. So like running for me is probably the other one where I could clear my head, but I'm not like the person who just goes for a leisurely run. Like it might be a short run, but I go to the point where I can't think. So I have to put out so hard that all I can think of is breathing and surviving. And then that's how I clear my head and I can come back with clarity. But I'm not one of those people that thinks about runs, because otherwise I have to like
run until you can't think. That's good.
Yeah, it's just put out to the point where
Right.
you're just exhausted and you're
Right.
like, oh, I can't think of anything. And then I can come back with a fresh set.
Pretty legit.
Yeah.
On that note, we'll end it.
Cool.
Thank you for sitting down with us.
Yeah, absolutely. Glad to be here, man.
That's it for this episode. If you want to check out more from the podcast, head to zeroeyes.com/nobel, where you can see show notes, read more about our guests, and suggest guests or topics of your own. Until next time, stay in the fight. Don't ring the bell.